Verbum Magia Part 7. I was fully settled into my routine. The dull monotony of shelving books and sorting scrolls becoming something I could do without much thought. I never rushed, but the thought of what I might find on the shelves consumed my mind every moment. The archive was no longer just a place of drudgery. It was a labyrinth of secrets, and I was determined to find the answers hidden within its walls. Tannel and Finane watched me like hawks anytime they were in the archive proper. Their disdain was palpable, but I'd grown used to it, tuning out their glares as I went about my tasks. There was a sort of thrill to knowing I was gaining knowledge I was never supposed to have. I was focused on the books I knew they would never want me to read. Old Xyrillian. The gods. I'd even seen mentions of human magic. Somewhere, buried in these stacks, was key to how I could get my voice and magic back. I stood in the blue section, the shelves towering above me, filled with volumes on magic, some bound in leather, others in fabrics that shimmered faintly in the dim light. My fingers itched to pull down a tome at random, to crack it open and drink in the knowledge. But I had to be careful. I couldn't afford to attract more attention than I already had. I wasn't even sure if the elves knew I could read. I wasn't supposed to be here for magic or power. I was just supposed to put things in their proper places and keep my head down. But that was never going to happen. Not when the answers were right in front of me. A low murmur of voices echoed from the corridor outside, pulling me from my thoughts. I quickly moved to the back of the blue section, pretending to busy myself with a pile of scrolls. However, I made sure I wasn't too far away to miss hearing the conversation. "The assessor's coming today," Tonnel said, his voice laced with disdain. "What business does she have here?" Finane grunted in agreement. "It's because of her that the human is here. What a waste of space." My stomach tightened at the mention of Yona. Of course, she was coming. It had been weeks since I last saw her, but her piercing green eyes had never left my mind. I'd never forget the way she had stripped my voice from me, like it was nothing more than an inconvenience. I kept my head down as the door opened, and I heard the soft sound of boots against the stone floor. There was a sudden chill in the room, the air thick with tension. The archivists barely greeted her, their voices low and filled with hostility. "Assessor," Tannel muttered, barely concealing his contempt. Yona didn't respond, or if she did, it was too quiet for me to hear. I risked a glance from where I stood behind the nearest shelf, watching as she moved through the room with purpose, her boots clicking softly against the stone floor. My heart pounded in my chest. What was she looking for? I couldn't resist. I had to know. She paused in front of a tall shelf, her sharp green eyes scanning the spines of the ancient volumes. "These archivists have no sense of organization. Who shelved these?" She muttered under her breath, her fingers tapping lightly against the bindings as she skimmed over the titles. "History. History. Ah." I bristled slightly at her accusation. While I hadn't organized all of the shelves at this point, I'd done many. It wasn't my organization system anyway. It was the elves. I'd love to introduce them to the Dewey Decimal System. But still, I was offended for the archive as a whole. Her hand hovered over a blue-bound tome, the faded gold lettering nearly illegible. She pulled it free, cradling the heavy book in one arm while she continued her search. "Ah, finally. But where are the others in the set?" she whispered, her voice barely audible as she scanned the shelves. Yona moved deeper into the restricted section, the soft glow of magical lights casting long shadows between the shelves. I cast a glance at where I'd last seen the archivists, but they had left shortly after Yona's arrival. With a quick inhale and a roll of my shoulders, I worked myself up to following her. I needed to keep out of her sight, but still see what she was doing. Hopefully she'd just ignore me like any other human slave. Before I could get her in my sight, I heard a frustrated sigh, followed by, "This isn't what I need. I swear, if I have to dig through another irrelevant tome." She stopped again, this time at a collection of scrolls bound in silver thread. One in particular caught her eye, a long, thin scroll tucked away behind the others, as if intentionally hidden. She pulled it free, unraveling it slightly to inspect its contents. The parchment was brittle, and the ink had faded with age, but even I could still make out the familiar symbols of the old Xyrillian script. "Yes, here we go. This one is more of an overview," Yona muttered. I still think the authors knew more than they were allowed to record. She placed the scroll under her arm, alongside the tome and continued moving. Yona's lips thinned into a line as she pulled another volume from the shelf, this one detailing the early days of the war that had nearly destroyed both races. They hid this knowledge for a reason, but why bury it here, of all places? She said, flipping through the pages. This isn't exactly magical theory. Yona glanced around the archive, her expression hardening. Whatever she was searching for, the knowledge was restricted. I twitched in anticipation of getting my hands on the books and scrolls she'd selected. Damn it, this should be in the primary read section. What were they thinking? They were definitely trying to hide this, but why? Yona murmured to herself, her gaze flicking briefly toward the shadowy corner of the archive where I hid. I froze. I think instincts told her she was being watched. She stared into the darkness a moment longer before turning away. If she saw me, she gave no indication. With a final glance at the shelves, Yona turned on her heel, her cloak swishing softly as she made her way toward a table. At least one of the books was part of the collection that was not allowed to leave the archive. When she settled in to read, a large sheet of parchment at hand for notes and her small stack already open, I finally convinced myself to get back to work. As I slowly circled the archive shelving and reshelving items, I kept her in my peripheral view as much as possible. She paid no attention to my movements, too engrossed in her reading. Finally, after over an hour, she closed the last of her books and stood with a stretch. I half expected her to just grab her notes and leave, but when she picked up the stack of books and scrolls, I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. She didn't take them to the returns cart. Instead, she meticulously placed each back where she'd gotten them. She really didn't want anyone knowing what she'd been researching. That made me all the more sure I wanted to know exactly what she'd been reading. Before leaving the last aisle, she rubbed her face and quietly muttered, "Why did the gods keep humans magicless? What were they truly afraid of? Or was it us?" What in the world had she been researching? I remained in the shadows, careful not to draw her attention, but my mind raced with questions. Yona was up to something, and I had an uneasy feeling that it had to be connected to why she had taken my voice. As she turned to leave, her gaze swept across the room. For a brief moment, our eyes met, just a flash, a second too long, and I froze, waiting for her to call me out, to demand to know what I was doing. But she said nothing. Instead, she walked out as silently as she had come, the door closing behind her with a soft click. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She was hiding something. And if I wanted my voice back, I had to figure out what it was. In the now empty archive, I slowly made my way over to the shelves she'd just left. I was impressed. She'd put them back exactly where and how she'd found them. If I hadn't been paying such careful attention over the last hour, I wouldn't have had any idea what she had pulled from the shelf. The first tome was titled in ancient Xyrillian and roughly translated to the Song of the Silent Stars, while the second was in modern Xyrillian, Echoes of the First Dawn. The scroll she'd pulled out and complained about was untitled. Only its threaded blue end gave a hint to what the contents should be. There was little information I could draw from the titles. Yona obviously had known exactly what she was looking for before she'd entered the archive. I took the books to my little reading nook and cracked the first tome open. I wasn't sure what I had expected, maybe a poetic or philosophical work on astronomy or magical theory. However, as I quickly read through its first pages, I couldn't believe what I was reading. The gods, who it seemed were very real and active in the world, had once gifted both elves and humans with magic. I flipped the pages more slowly now, reading each word carefully. Apparently, humans broke a pact of peace, wielding magic in ways that had offended the gods so greatly that they banished the entire race, creating a magicless world, Earth. My mind raced with the implications of what I had already uncovered. The elves had been left behind, struggling to maintain their dominance in a world that grew ever more dangerous. Other races had learned to use magic as well. Never on the scale of the elves or humans, but enough that even with the humans gone, war had continued for several years. I closed the book with a snap, my heart pounding in her chest. The history of the humans' fall from power was a delicate web of lies and forgotten truths. We'd never started on Earth. We, like the elves and all the rest, were created here on Xyrillia. My magic here wasn't a fluke. I'd inherited the magic. It was part of me, part of every human brought back. All of us had the potential to wield magic again, just as we once did, and the elves had kept us from it. I was just lucky enough to have learned Latin, Xerilian. This meant that any human could use magic. They just needed to learn the language. I closed that book and opened the second. Echoes of the First Dawn was a short and vague telling of the desperate summoning of humans back to Xerelia after a great threat emerged that the elves could not face alone. Expecting the returned humans to wield magic fluently, the elves were stunned to find they had no knowledge of Xerilian. Rather than restore their magical heritage, they subjugated the humans as slaves, seeing them as tools rather than equals. Summoned them to use them, I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of the realization. The elves hadn't brought the humans back with the intention of free labor, but necessity. They had summoned them to fight. What the great threat wasn't specified. Clearly, whatever it had been, the author had assumed that the reader would have known about it. I turned finally to the unmarked scroll. The parchment was thin, and my heart thudded as I worried whether it would withstand being unrolled once again. When I finally had it laid out in front of me, I was once again unprepared for the contents. The scroll started with fragments of the pact between the gods and the two magical races, written in the ancient, flowing script of Old Xerilian. There was enough from the fragments for me to piece together a decree from the gods, granting both humans and elves the shared gift of magic, with the understanding that it was to be wielded in balance. The middle section of the scroll, however, described a schism, a violation by humans who, in their arrogance, sought to use magic for dominion over all other life, even the gods. The final portion detailed the gods' punishment, the creation of a world where no magic could exist, a realm apart, Earth, and the banishment of all humans to live there until their arrogance was forgotten. I understood what Yona had meant when she called the scroll a summary, but I couldn't help but reread the section about trying to overtake the gods. Arrogant, indeed. My eyes narrowed, though, as I reread the last line, which spoke of a rift and the conditions under which humans might one day return, though with no memory of their once great power. I didn't think the gods had decided that humanity was ready to return to Xerelia. Rather, the elves had found a way to access this rift and brought humans in through it. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I carefully tucked the scrolls and books under my arm. The gods had sent humans to Earth to remove their magic. But it wasn't just punishment. It was erasure. The elves had found a way to reverse it, bringing the humans back, but not knowing they no longer wielded their power. And now we were little more than tools in this God's awful world. What I still didn't understand was why Yona was researching this. Was she scared that more humans would know Xerilian when they were summoned? Or was it something else? Whatever it was, she clearly didn't want anyone else to know what she'd been reading. Enjoying the story? Don't forget to subscribe and comment. Your support helps us create more stories just for you.